This is the Neurosurgery Podcast.
Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest. That's from Ecclesiastes, and in fact, I was in Catholic school from elementary all the way until college, and that was my high school yearbook graduation quote. And I could not think of a more appropriate phrase to open a conversation on sloth, which to me is epitomized by the feeling of just, I don't want to do that. Its opposite is zeal. And frankly, it's going to be tough for me and Dr. Wang to talk about sloth, right? But we will find a way. I think it'll be easier to talk about zeal. And something I'm very zealous about is this right here.
Yes. The Mao Tai, Kwicha Mao Tai, 106 proof. JP and I are going to do a little shot. Mao Tai is a rarefied Chinese liquor made of sorghum, and it is a custom in Chinese culture. To be drinking this. And these tiny little thimble shot glasses. It has 6 flavors as it descends down your gullet. Cheers, JP.
Cheers. And to you.
Different, right?
I'm around number 4 right now.
So sloth's interesting because it's kind of the thing we fear the most, right? You say, we're going to work this many hours, do this many cases. What does someone do if they are not able to bring their will to bear? What is a resident who can't do the hours? I mean, Steve Giannotti said on our podcast that the greatest predictor of success in neurosurgery is resistance to fatigue.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it goes even deeper than that. And I'm just going to recline on the Sloth Sofa. Right, yes. The Sloth Sofa. But I think that physical fatigue and tiredness, I don't think you can call that a sin. I don't think you can call that evil. That's bad, right? It could be bad if you're tired and you don't have energy when you wish that you did. That's bad. But I think evil comes when you know the right thing to do and you know that you should be doing something right now, and not because you're physically incapable, but you just choose not to do it because, I'd rather not, right?
Well, let's go back in time, right? At the time that these concepts were derived were at least 1,000 years prior, something along those lines.
Oh, yeah.
And in those times, obviously, basic sustenance, shelter, heat was a potential hazard to existence. So someone who was too slothful during the planting or harvesting times or hunting times would face starvation, right? I mean, it's existential. Now, we don't really see that in America in any real way. I'm not saying there aren't people that are suffering. I'm just saying, like, really our problem is not that people are starving to death in America, right?
Right.
So we don't see that. And there are very few people who willingly go without shelter, although they do exist. So I think that if you look at this from the perspective of where you see it happening, well, let's go back to our favorite paradigm, which is tier 1 operators.
Yeah.
Why do they put such an emphasis in their early selection and training on this piece? Maybe more than any other, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's because, kind of like we talked about in previous episodes of this series, because you never want to be making a decision because you're tired, right? So if it's 2 a.m. and you get called with a 17-year-old who has an epidural hematoma, you don't want to not be going in to do the surgery because you're too tired, right?
Yeah.
Or if you see someone with a spine fracture,
right,
who's unstable, and, let's say it's 5 p.m.,
right,
and you say to yourself, well, I did 6 cases today, you're running 2 rooms, I did 6 cases, I'm a little worn out. I'll just do it tomorrow.
Here again, let me draw a more modern synonym. It's not a synonym, but a more modern relation to this for the young people. I think that what they're really talking about is selfishness. So in other words, the sloth is a conservation of energy. We don't really need that nowadays. People are overweight, right? But the slothfulness is saying, I'm prioritizing myself, my energy, over the needs of this person.
Right.
I think that's where it draws a little bit stronger relevance.
Yeah, and as I often do, I'll talk to the younger people in our audience, and for me, I think the lowest hanging fruit and the simplest example for this is when you're taking overnight call and you're in the hospital. There are people, junior residents, who take call, and their mission mindset is, my number one priority is to get sleep tonight.
And pass every task on to the next guy.
Sure.
Or gal, right?
Right.
That's a corollary.
Right, and it's looking out for yourself. Whereas what I used to say when I was taking call a lot, and what I say to people now who are in those years of residency is, the worst thing that could possibly happen to you tonight is you don't get any sleep. Right? Because as we've often talked about on this show, we're not the ones with the injuries. Right. House of God, right? The patient is the one with the disease.
Right.
We're not getting hurt. We're not getting cut. We're not losing blood. The worst thing that can possibly happen to you on a night of call is that you don't get any sleep. And, okay, you go home and sleep when you're done, right? That you should be, your mindset when you're on duty in-house is no expectation of sleep. And that's okay. You can survive overnight, right? It's not a death sentence. Mm-hmm. You should be zealous, right? You signed up to come be there that night.
Yeah, I think the idea is that the current thinking is that it's about the health of the provider to a large degree.
Yeah.
And safety and risk, right? So what do you say to the folks that are having problems with this? So in other words, some of this is hardwired into our genetics as everything else. And some people don't have the level of energy. Some people cannot, they don't have the stamina. They can't go through as many nights of limited sleep.
Yeah.
What do those people do?
Well, I think we have to take a step back from that physical fatigue thing, because I don't think it's a physical problem. Mm-hmm. I simply don't. I think it's a psychological problem, and I think it's a situational problem. We've talked a few times on regular episodes of this show with Anthony DiGiorgio at UCSF, who did this incredible paper where he quantified how much time his residents there at UCSF spend on Epic, on EHR. It's like 9 hours a shift, right? Yeah. And so that's neurosurgery residents on call. Imagine an internal medicine resident on call. How much of your time in a 24-hour or an overnight shift, you're not saving a life. You're not seeing a patient and talking to them about an injury. You're not making clinically significant decisions. You're clicking things on a computer screen. Yeah. That is depressing, right? Yeah. And so we talk about burnout. I don't think it's the hours that you're on duty. I don't think it's the hours that you're in the building. I don't think it's the hours that you're awake. I think it's what you're doing during that time. Yeah. Because, God, it's easy to be a zealot. It's easy to have zeal.
If you're saving lives.
If you're saving lives, right? Time flies when you're having fun. Well, guess what? Time flies when you're seeing patients with real pathology and having meaningful interactions with them and fixing it. Mm-hmm. Time does not fly when you're updating a Foley order at 2 a.m. because a nurse paged you about it. Right. And time does not fly when you're seeing the 9th chronic compression fracture in someone who got a CT scan because they have a kidney stone and it was incidentally red. Right? Like, there are shortcomings in our system. But I think that positive, passionate zeal that we feel and that we see in our colleagues and want to foster in the people joining our field is harder to find sometimes in the modern healthcare environment.
So let's go to the recent episode you did, and I was not part of it, of the UK system. And okay, so they're already at what, 36 hours a week or something like that?
It's very low. I think it's
like,
low 40s, 42,
okay, 42,
something like that.
Like it's literally like working at Pep Boys, and nothing wrong with that, by the way. But like you get what I'm saying. And so what's the gripe? What's the problem? How does it? Because I feel like it's about this.
Yeah.
I feel like it's about this issue, and I'm not taking the side of the hospital here. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, for in that specific situation, this was actually shocking to me. This was a conversation with Dr. Patrick Grover. He initially came on the show as part of our series with Electa about Lexcel's gamma knife technology, and then we were just chatting before his interview for that, and he was telling me about the strike going on. So we had him come on to talk about this strike of junior doctors, as they're called in the UK. We would say residents or trainees, and it's not for their hours; it's for their salary. Apparently, they're making less than half of what residents make in the States, and so especially after recent inflation and cost of living in London, where it's not even a living wage. So their strike is more about the salary than about their hours per se.
So they're okay with their hours.
Yeah, and in fact, at least according to Dr. Grover, most of them work over the limit because they
get paid
the
more.
surgeries. No,
they don't get paid more.
They do moonlight. They have opportunities for moonlighting and like compensated extra time, but also they just come in to do surgeries because they want exposure to the surgery. They're zealous, right?
Yeah.
But that's one thing where we talk about our duty hours and this aspect of our job and residency that's actually restricted by law, and whether or not you follow those laws, either because your department leadership has requirements of you and the program needs someone on duty, or you want to stay post-call and see a surgery and participate. But there are so many other aspects of our lives where there are opportunities to do good that's easy to shrug off, and it's easy to justify shrugging it off because I'm so tired. Yeah. Oh, I worked all day. And one that I really do want to bring up with you in particular, Dr. Wang, is academic productivity, which is not for everyone.
Yeah.
Sure, it's expected during residency that you'll write some papers and participate in some projects so you're at least knowledgeable in how it's done so you could interpret it later. That's the logic. You write some papers, you submit them, you conduct a small study here and there so that later, even if you're just a community clinical neurosurgeon with no academic activity at all, you know how to read a paper and you know how the sausage is made, right? But you're highly productive academically. And you're also incredibly busy clinically. So one could imagine with a practice as busy as yours in the clinic, in the operating room, wife and kids at home, I used to write papers for you.
Yeah.
I was that student.
Amazing job.
And I would send them to you, and you would read them and get back to them. There's some people, you send papers to them, and it's, you drag their feet, and you're waiting to hear back, and you say, hey, can I get revisions on this? How do you find the zeal to take your time and your energy and put it into something that doesn't immediately impact someone's life, right? Because who knows the impact of a single paper, right? So it's easy to brush these things off. How do you push away the sloth and find motivation for that?
I mean, you got to believe in what you're writing about, right?
Yeah.
So that's the important thing. So the easiest papers to write are the ones where you have a passion for the concepts at play. Now, that brings, of course, the issue of bias, right? Which is that you're picking a side on this.
Yeah.
But you are, in a way, trying to build the framework of science for the future. But you're absolutely right. We have a problem today, which is that a lot of folks who are qualified to write are not doing it as much. But then a lot of folks are actually just writing to write.
Yeah.
Right? We see this with the medical students now. You
Yes.
have to have the papers. And look, I don't hold it against them. I think, look, it's a different world now. But as far as the energy to do it, the hardest part is not finding energy to write papers. It's having the root elements, meaning, am I actually writing about something important? So most people get to my age and they get to this point where like, I mean, is what I'm writing like useful? Is it meaningful to other people? Does it contribute? Does it change anything? And if the answer to that is no, then it's really hard to keep going because you're like, well, what's the purpose of this exercise, right?
Yeah.
Whereas helping patients is obvious, generating RVUs is obvious, right? Those are obvious, effort related and measurable outcomes. But writing papers is very, very different. Research even harder, right? Just basic research.
Yeah.
But I would say that for us, like at a root level, sloth is the least important problem we face, right? We screen early for that. People that can't do the work, people that won't do the work. I mean, you don't see it a rush, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something we see as much. The question is, do people cut corners?
Right. And that's just it. When we were attempting to define terms at the outset of all of this, we were talking about good and how hard that was to define.
Yeah.
Compared to evil, because you could just show up, meet expectations, and that's pretty good, honestly. In the history of the human story, someone who shows up on time, meets expectations, doesn't lie, goes home, that's very good. But those opportunities that come along to surpass that, to be heroic, to achieve greatness, not just good.
Mm-hmm. Can you inspire zeal, you think? Is it possible? Or does it happen natively?
I think the answer has to be yes, because I have felt inspired to zeal.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps there has to be a spark already there to be fanned into a flame.
Mm-hmm.
But I have personally been inspired in many aspects of life, at many ages of life, by many people. So I think I have to say yes because I've experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who's played organized sports, I think, has been inspired,
Yeah.
right? Or certainly, I would think people who have served in a military capacity. I think that is what being part of a team is.
Yeah.
Right? It's an almost zealous devotion to the team or the goal, something greater than yourself. And thinking about that, and thinking about that academic productivity, but zooming it out just from papers, I know that you have strong opinions about academic practice versus private practice.
Yeah.
And obviously, you're an academic neurosurgeon. You have been your entire career. You're also like an archetype of hyperproductivity and efficiency. And on paper, if one didn't know that you were a professor, you could imagine you as a private practice guy. You roll in, you're hyper efficient, MIS, you do these cases, you get them done, you have that flavor to your persona, I guess, surgically at least. But you're not. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe set you up for talking about why you chose to stay within academia and why you chose, because again, as you pointed out, in the set of neurosurgeons, sloth isn't easy to find.
Yeah.
But in context, it can be. And coming in, operating twice a week, banging out some microdiscs, going home, in the context of neurosurgeons and spine surgeons, that might be sloth for someone like you who has the capacity to bang out 6 microdiscs in a day and go home. But instead, you could also teach people how to do it, write 5 papers, give a talk on top of all that.
Well, let me proffer a slightly different perspective on the sloth issue, which is that there's a tendency in most humans to think that the way the scenario is laid out, this environment today, will forever be like this in perpetuity. There's a very strong tendency to believe that, right? But the reality is really quite different. So in other words, people were not prepared for hurricanes. People were not prepared for volcanoes erupting. People were not prepared for environmental catastrophes. So we have an environmental catastrophe. We have an increasingly aging population. We have an increasingly strong need for neurosurgical intervention because it affects the elderly, right? We have a diminished number of physicians relative to that. We have reduced reimbursement in the face of that, and we have the desire by the providers, surgeons, hospitals, et cetera, to maintain either sustained profitability, but certainly not diminished. If anything, increasing.
Yeah.
So when you look at that scenario,
That is bleak.
right. So there are only a couple ways out of this. You can cheat. You can be a criminal. You can be picky, but assuming you can outcompete everybody else, or you can scale. So, I mean, I talk about this a lot, that it's coming for spine, that, you know, right now you do 200 cases a year. If in 5 or 10 years you can't do 300, then honestly, you know, the way the system's set up, you're going to get a huge haircut, gigantic, and not even like inflation adjusted and all that stuff. And doctors are horrible at this. And I'm not saying this is not about greed, right? Let's say you bought an expensive house. Let's say you're used to this lifestyle. Let's say that it's just a matter of pride that you don't want to be the loser, right? Then if you're not doing a substantial amount of work, however you choose to measure that, seeing ER consults, doing surgeries, clinic patients, writing papers, doing research, whatever it is, teaching people, the whole of capitalist society has been that we do more efficiently, more effectively over time.
Yeah.
But most surgeons, once they master craft, they say, I'm the artist, I'm done evolving, now it's about me. And so that's really the clarion call as we wrap this up. That if, look, I do 640 to 70 cases a year. Okay, let's just say it's that. Maybe it's 605, but it's not 300 or 400. I have to see 100 people a week or 70 people a week to do that ethically, right? Because obviously that's what it takes, and I have to take care of people I operated on. And then what is that going to mean in 10 years? Does it mean it's got to be 1,000? Well, if that's the case, then I better develop the modus, the techniques, the methods, the ecosystems, the ways to do that effectively, safely, economically. And so people don't see this; they're just putting their head in the sand.
Yeah.
And the younger you are, the bigger that problem is. In the same way that people say, "Well, I'm young, so I invest in the stock market, so 10,000 becomes 6 million." That same rubric is working against you if you think that you're going to be stagnant. So for the young people out there, for the old people, whatever, they're fine. They're going to retire. For the young people, if you think we're going to be doing surgery the way we do today forever, you're crazy.
Right. But I think with this sin of sloth, more than any that we've discussed so far, this really is an internal metric and rubric.
Well, sloth is death. Sloth is to say you're not going to be prepared. It's the pigs with the houses, right? The three pigs, right?
Pigs,
3 little pigs, right? You built your house out of straw, right? And then one built it out of sticks, and then the next one built out of bricks. It takes time to build that brick house. Yeah. You've got to prepare while the sun shines. Right now, the sun actually, despite all the complaining, the sun is still shining for us. Time is coming.
Yeah.
But maybe Gooby saw this.
Maybe, but I think a young surgeon just starting practice can't compare to you doing 600 cases a year, right? And so if you look at a young surgeon in first year of practice and say, I'm doing 600 cases a year, what are you doing? 200? Sloth? No, the sloth is internal, right?
It's internal.
It's a, are you at your personal capacity, or are you falling short of what you personally are capable of, right?
Here's the sloth.
Because the only way to increase your personal capacity, it's like weightlifting. You both lift weights. The only way to make gains is to go to failure. Yeah. And you hit the point of failure, and that raises where your point of failure is. You didn't come out of training doing 600 cases a year.
Right, of course not. And the evil part of sloth is this, that I'm going to do 200 cases a year. But I want to see, I'm seeing 50 people in clinic a week. Now I want to see 30 because I'm tired. I don't want to talk to these people. So now you're seeing less people to do the same or more number of cases.
Surgeries.
How do you do that? More surgery per patient,
Yep.
or more surgery looser standards, right?
Yeah.
By the whatever metric it is that enter surgery.
Oh, but my referrals are really good, and I
Yeah.
get really good screening to get to
all
my
bullshit.
clinic. No one comes to my clinic
Yeah.
if they aren't surgical. No one.
Right.
No one.
It's all bullshit.
Sure.
Look, I get it. Like, everybody thinks they found these answers. There's certain basic economic principles that are very hard to escape, right? If you're going to see a ton of people, right, what are they going to consist of? And everybody, as I said, sloth is a form of selfishness. It's saying, well, I'm not going to take the time to talk somebody out of surgery because it makes no revenue for me. And it pisses off whoever recommended surgery because now you're going against them. Great. That's essentially selfish.
Yeah.
Because if you really believe the patient doesn't need surgery, take the time to do that.
Yeah.
So if that's what you're saying I'm going to see one less patient who needs to be talked out of surgery, that's sloth. It's selfishness. Because you could do a lot of good for the world by talking them out of surgery. Or, validating they don't need it.
Yeah, good for that patient or for the...
I didn't get it.
You got a gooby mosquito?
Yeah, gooby mosquito.
Yeah.
You're going to think my house is full of mosquitoes now. It's horrible.
No, the windows are open.
Yeah.
But no, you do good for that patient by preventing them from having something unindicated, and I would hope you build a good relationship with the referring doctor who can trust you
Exactly.
to give your expert opinion, right?
That's exactly right. And so, always thinking about what could happen to us as a field. If you believe in what you do, and I absolutely do, I believe surgery works in the right person. We have to find the right people. And I'm wrong sometimes. Like, I'm wrong 8% of the time or 6% of the time or what. It happens, right? But I'm most of the time right. And my principles are true, and the patient knows it. Patient knows the principles. Then you should want to do more surgery. Not to the point of exhaustion or breakdown, but to the limit that you can do that in your life. Because if you said you got 80% good results, and that's pretty good, it's not exceptional, but it's not horrible, and you operate on 1,000 people, that's 800 people you helped.
Yeah.
And if you do that 10,000 times, that's 8,000 people you
Right.
helped. Isn't that what we should be doing?
Yeah.
The sloth method is to say, well, it doesn't matter how many people get better or how many people I operate on. It matters what the time efficiency of benefit to work.
Yeah.
Meaning I'm going to get the most out of each person, but it doesn't really matter, how much they get better or how many people I help.
Yeah. Well, because if you think about the phenomenon of marginal effects.
Yeah.
So if you do 801 versus 800 people that you helped, for you, who gives a shit?
Right.
That's nothing. But for that one person, right?
Yeah. So 100% difference.
That's exactly. That's
right.
actually really interesting. The selfishness of sloth versus the zeal if you really believe in your work.
So going back to Gooby and Doobie, right? It's like, you're here to alleviate suffering. What do you mean? Population-based? Individual-based? The reality is that for that one person, it means everything. The one person that was killed at the Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, right? I mean, we heard a lot about that individual, right?
Yeah.
That's an important person now. It's just another person out of 340 million.
Yeah.
But the reality, everybody matters.
The death of one is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic, as Stalin said.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And I guess then the thing we have to talk about, which we've kind of touched on this with these other sins, but maybe the one place that sloth really does get neurosurgeons stereotypically is with our families.
Yeah.
And you talk about this a lot.
I'm guilty of it.
Not in the worst case, because the oldest joke is in America the divorce rate is 50%, and in neurosurgeons it's twice that, right? So you have seen your friends and colleagues, people that you mentor and train, who, as we talked about, zealously, generously, passionately give our time, our attention, our lives to this endeavor,
Right.
which is this a tradition, something greater than ourselves,
Yep.
to give our lives to those 801 and that 802nd person and that 803rd person, because we can conceive of the impact to that individual, even though it's a margin of a percent of a fraction to ourselves. And we see neurosurgeons whose own lives wither away.
Yeah.
as they give all of their spirit to this machine.
Well, Gooby did not take care of himself. So in other words, physical fitness is important to us, right? But
Yes.
you have to care for yourself, or you cannot. Your own physiologic machine cannot run. Your family, the structure, like it's very important who you marry. It is so important, right? Who your partner is, right? And some people look. There's illness. There's problems with families, and some people have an issue with a child, with a sickness. That's unavoidable, right?
Right.
That we're not speaking to that. There's no way to plan for that. That happens.
Yeah.
And this is not intended to be like all hard knocks about that. But those situations are the exception.
Yeah.
The vast majority of cases are, look, do your fucking job, right? Believe in what you do. Don't let yourself burn out. It's the same as the Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
Take care of your team. Take care of yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you asked if one could inspire zeal in someone. I'm feeling pretty fired up right now.
Yeah, fucking A, man.
Yeah. And I think that leads us to the logical conclusion to all of this. For the zealots out there, we're putting out a call.
Yeah,
We're calling for recruits.
that's right.
We're recruiting for the army of good.
That's right. Enlistment is open now.
Enlistment is open now, and we're going to come back and talk real soon about the army of good and how to join the ranks.